Hey there, what is the grid system? Well, you're about to find out. It is a very simple, easy to learn, and epic way to build tabletop role-playing games. We've made a bunch of them. I have Tony Grasso here, who's made Blister Critters. We both worked on Stillfleet and The Sometimes Kingdom with Ethan Gould and Danse Macabre with Christopher Pickett and a whole bunch of others. In a nutshell, the grid system is a system in which you only are really rolling one die at a time. You're trying to get a 6 or better, and you have big epic powers. They cost a resource called grit. You can also use grit to boost those rolls. So it's very simple to learn, but it allows for a really big scale of activities in imaginal games. So we're going to go through some of those different aspects. Tony, do you want to talk about scores as dice and boosting?
Yeah. So in the grid system games, your scores in other games, attributes or stats, are made up of an array of dice. So at character creation, you assign a die type to your given score, and then when the GM prompts you for a given check, that is the die type you roll. Like Wythe said, you're always aiming for a 6 or higher, although the GM can set the difficulty a bit higher for harder checks. And so if you want to be exceptionally good in, say, combat, you might assign a d12 to your combat. So when prompted for a check, you roll a d12, you're pretty likely to get over a 6. But if you only have a d6 and, say, charm, when the GM asks you for a roll, you're probably not going to hit it that often. That is where boosting comes in. So you're able to use a resource called grit, and you can burn it in 3, 6, or 9 amounts to add 3, 6, or 9 to any given roll prior to rolling. So it's a little bit of a gamble, because on a 1 you still fail, but it's a really valuable and versatile resource in that it gives you the opportunity as a player to really give it your all when you know that there's a check that kind of has everything on the line.
Yeah, and in addition to that, you need to burn grit to use many of your powers. So some powers might be free, but most of the epic powers that define a class or some other organization, a Blister Path in Blister Critters, a class background in Danse Macabre, they often cost a grit. So when you burn a bunch of grit and use an epic narrative power, you can change the game right away. And there's examples of this like Insult in Blister Critters, where you can cause someone to fail by insulting them. You call them out, right? And that NPC right, or other player character fails whatever they just did. Or Slay in Stillfleet, where you can kill an NPC, an alien, your boss, immediately by succeeding on an attack check. So it costs a bunch of grit, and it even has the threat of really making you feel some kind of way, but it allows you to play that role of narratively moving the scene forward. And whether that's getting out of dodge or a really unexpected result, it will force everyone at the table to kind of grapple with that and work it into the story. And that's the idea of the narrative powers, or why we say it's medium crunch, because we still have those really simple dice interactions. So for task resolution, you're rolling, you're trying to get a 6, you can add 3, 6, or 9. So you can play it a little bit crunchier in that sense, but the narrative powers allow the system to go more in that story game direction of big scene level changes in the player's hands. So it is a collaboration between GMs and players, and it was really made for adventure games, and that's what we focused on, and we're pretty proud of it. So we're going to talk a little more about it, but yeah, Tony, thanks for that introduction.
Wythe, can you tell me about combat in the grid system?
Yeah, sure. So usually adventure games have combat. They don't have to. This could also represent social combat, and you could change the score names. So instead of combat, meaning how deadly you are in Stillfleet, where you're playing Space Marines, or Blister Critters, having Scrap, where you're playing scrappy little mutant animals, you could have a game where this is represented differently. In an adventure game where you are fighting things with swords or lasers, you roll combat to hit. That's called an attack. It's a kind of check. You can boost that check. And when you attack something, if that thing can move, they get to roll dodge. So they're rolling their movement score in Stillfleet, or the equivalent score in Blister Critters, right, would be scurry, and they're trying to jump away. Now the attacker wins ties because they're initiating the attack. So the dodger has to get even better. But again, they can boost. Simply enough, if you hit, you inflict damage. Damage is usually you're rolling some dice. So weapons have different dice, which, like your scores, go up and down. Unlike your scores, it doesn't matter if you get a 6 or some other number. It's just a quantitative result. It's how much damage do you inflict. And your opponent might have armor, which in our games, usually we use damage reduction, DR, to just take some of that damage off the top. Usually that's a pretty low number, so combat is deadly. But again, in the different games, whether it's medieval zombies in Danse Macabre or far future space marines with exosuits, you're going to see sort of different amounts of deadliness for the player characters and for the things they might be hitting with swords or lasers. Tony, do you want to talk a little about sort of ranges of weapons and different conditions that weapons might inflict, more sort of complicated stuff?
Right. So, unlike in other games where it's kind of tracked down to the meter, the square, the foot, in the various grid system games that we've developed, we set up different range bands. And so the names change vaguely depending on the game, but broadly they are close, which is, kind of at hand, near, which is, in a span of in the same room, far, which is probably maybe a room away or just outside of throwing distance, and then there is beyond, is buildings away. You can maybe throw something at it if you had a rocket launcher. And so all of the powers and the way combat is set up operates within those ranges. So melee combat operates at close range, and then all of the range, guns, slingshots, boomerangs, and frisbees, as it would be in Blister Critters, those occur at from near to far. At the point where you're in the beyond range, you are beyond the ability to interact with in a single turn. Wythe, can you tell me how conditions work in combat?
Yeah, so there's different conditions, which can really be any tag, anything you want to say that a weapon or a power has, and conditions that can be inflicted, like in other games, you might have bleed or burn, so ongoing damage, and burn gets worse over time if it's not treated. So if you're on fire, don't put the fire out because you're still being attacked.
Right.
You keep suffering more and more damage. Stun would cause you to lose your turn, which is obviously a nasty one to use on player characters, but you could build encounters around that. So that's where we say medium crunch. You can use those conditions and plenty of others that have come up, blind, drunk, all kinds of fun ones, cause disadvantage on checks, to design encounters that are more like puzzles and have more of that crunch feature. You can also ignore conditions entirely, in the same way that with this very simple ranges, you don't really need to track anything. If weapons or powers do have conditions, if nobody really cares, or if you as the GM don't want to stun a player, you can just say, well, instead they inflict extra damage, right? But conditions are a great way to simply give tags to something and make it slightly more interesting without having everyone to remember some complicated mechanic. Tony, do you want to tell us a little about designing encounters in grid system games and sort of what goes into, how much math is the GM doing behind the screen, that kind of thing?
Right. I think for the grid system game, it's actually really easy for new GMs to get into designing encounter blocks. The general wisdom that we give, depending on the game, is if you have a kind of a random NPC coming up and you want them to be combat focused, or at least anticipate that being an option, across all of their scores, you give them a D6. If this is just a guy that they're running into, you can give them flat D6s across the board, and that'll mean that sometimes they land a hit, and it usually gives a more heroic feel for the players at hand. If you want to increase the difficulty, you can give them all D8s. That makes them a little bit stronger. At the point where they have more D10s than not, your NPC that you're running into is probably doing some heavy damage, or at the very least is more competent than they would be otherwise. Aside from just their scores, you also are going to give them their health and their grit, because like the players, they can take damage. They cannot boost, but some of their powers require grit to be used. So the encounters in our games aren't low-powered necessarily. They have the same kinds of powers as the players, which to me makes them more interesting. It allows there to be more familiarity with the system, both from the players and the GMs. And so then to that end, you're setting up a number of powers and attacks that you can grab from various lists and categories within the book. So most encounter blocks are going to have a couple of normal attacks that won't require any grit. Those are usually tied to whatever weapon or implement they have at hand. And then in lower powered games like Blister Critters, they only have a couple of the fancier powers, the more narrative powers that require a bit of grit. Whereas in the other games like Stillfleet, they might have 5 or 6 of these bigger powers that offer kind of a broad suite of options for GMs to really put together either a narratively focused NPC, so maybe they're not focused on combat. A lot of their powers are like insult or ones that help them lie better. Or if they are combat focused, they can give them more of the weird or the hell science powers that allow them to kind of bend reality in a way that might be startling to the players, but also grants them a leg up in combat over just a guy showing up with a gun, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can also run encounters a little differently. Instead of tracking individuals, you can have a mob, which is basically pooling their health and giving them basically one attack per player character. So it becomes much more of that puzzle where instead of we're doing tactical combat, we're narratively in a sea of zombies and trying to escape, which can really raise the stakes. So it's not sort of like, okay, I can get away from this one person, but yeah, I know that there's 50 other sort of shamblers out there. And I need to account for that. If I really want to kill them all, then I need like the flamethrower. Whereas to outrun them, maybe, is a wiser choice and is easier to resolve. You're not rolling 50D movement. You're just rolling one time. Maybe there's some condition written in, a bullet point for that mob that they're either faster or slower or whatever. But designing mobs can be really fun too. So you design a few epic NPCs who are more like bosses or more interesting, where you do want more of those stats. And the books all have plenty of examples of this. And then you might have mobs where you have sort of smaller, small fry, so the heroes can feel heroic and turn away a whole army if that's the kind of power fantasy you're going for. And depending on the game, again, they're just very different kinds of combat, whether it's physical, social, and whether we're talking about, shooting stuff or, bonking it with sort of household objects and Blister Critters in a sort of cartoon environment. But overall, because the system is the system and it's very easy to learn, it's also really easy to design for. So no matter what kind of encounter you want to run, you can get some good examples in any given game and just in general with the free system reference document, and you can design away. So what are powers in the grid system? They're kind of like moves in Powered by the Apocalypse games, but we like to call them powers because they are a little different, because there are GM moves in Apocalypse games that aren't mechanical, or they're mechanical in a sort of weaker, indirect way around the narrative. Whereas when we say power, we mean something that a character, player character, non-player character can do that affects the game. Often it costs grit, not always. And it's kind of got its own little unique mechanic. Otherwise, you could just roll your scores. The scores are simple enough and they model pretty much everything in a given game. But the powers let you do things outside of that basic simulation. They let you add on extra special stuff that defines your class, your species, your type of magic or psionics or whatever. And because of that, they're all in a flat hierarchy of just powers. So it's really easy to write them and you don't have to worry too much. If you have a cool idea, maybe that is associated with a given class. But because of the flat hierarchy, maybe later some random monster can use that power because it's good mechanically and it kind of fits. And maybe even it's a creepy way to sort of see through the mirror darkly, right? So it's fun to design for in that sense, and a little less restrictive feeling, I think, than some of the Powered by the Apocalypse, where the narrative moves are really baked into the playbooks. What we're doing here is just coming up with a list of cool powers and then grouping them. So what is a class in a grid system game? It's just a group of powers. It's a group of powers that a player character can take at first level and say, look, this is my training or my role, my background, right? So if you were the Still Rider, the Space Marine in Stillfleet, you get combat powers. Your main one is that you have an exosuit. You have an incomplete but well-restored ancient exosuit that enables you to have high damage reduction and survive in space and that kind of thing. In other games, you have different classes or paths or backgrounds, but they're all groups of powers. And again, they're really easy to design for, easy to hack, swap things in and out, right?
Yeah.
Tony, do you want to talk a little about sort of species or critters, what kind of thing you are?
Right. So in Blister Critters, one of the categories of power that you select during character creation is tied directly to what kind of animal you are playing as. So each of the animals come with 2 animal talents, 2 powers, somewhat unique to them as a different kind of animal. So as an example, if you play as the armadillo, One of your powers is that you can shed off a piece of your shell, your scoot, and give that to another player as a bit of temporary damage reduction, as like a shield that breaks, the first time it gets hit. But in a pinch, 2DR, at least in Blister Critters, goes a long way. A different example would be if you were playing some of the reptilian species, the reptilian animals. You can restore grit. You can restore some of your energy the first time that you enter the sun in a given scene, in a given portion of the game. So for Blister Critters, the kind of animal you are really gives you a cool set of powers that are almost wholly unique unto you, that are really tied to the animal and not necessarily all of the cartoony or the mutated stuff. The weirder parts of Blister Critters. I don't know if Wythe, you want to speak on, I guess, how weird stuff works in not just Blister Critters, but in Stillfleet and in other parts of the system.
Yeah, so by having that group of powers, you can define a class, a species, or in the case of the capital W weird, or called in Stillfleet the hell science, to be cool, basically magic or psionics. So what you might call epicycles, or things that break the rules on purpose. So if you have a bunch of powers that are really powerful, maybe they're also really costly, and they really change the game in a different way than some of the core powers. So for example, being able to read minds, it's not something normally that humans, or in the imagined future of Stillfleet, big alien bugs can do. So if you can do that, then you're using that kind of psionics, that hell science. So those groups of powers around mind reading are grouped together, and they're only available to a certain class, and there's sort of ups and downs of picking that. So it gets crunchier in that sense of you've taken the flat hierarchy and you said, aha, I'm sort of removing something from it or setting it to the side. But that allows you in any of these games to kind of have some level of difference between sort of normal powers, which could still be really, really powerful, and your sort of weird powers, or again, your version of magic, psionics, or some other thing. Maybe it's hacking in a cyberpunk game. I don't know. We haven't done that yet. But you want to set aside the ability for players to unlock that other list. And the simple idea is, again, at the end of the day, these are all lists of cool narrative things players can do, and they usually cost grit. Tony, do you want to give us another example from Blister Critters?
Yeah, so for Blister Critters, it being a cartoon show, you are an animal on a cartoon show, there are a category of powers called nonsense powers. And these are specifically cartoon tropes. One of them being you can use your tail or a different bodily appendage as a helicopter blade. So you spend some grit, you whir it up, and then you're able to fly for a certain amount of time. Another being that you kind of have an infinity pocket. You just reach in. There's no bottom to it. And so in that way, it gives people, specifically for Blister Critters, the opportunity to really lean into the cartoony. Alternatively, kind of like what Wythe was saying, you can really customize it and get what you want out of it. If you are already playing a game that is extremely cartoony, or if you want to dial back the level of cartoony, there's enough alternative lists of power in any given game that rather than when you would go get a new power, rather than taking the cartoony one, you can double down on an animal power. You can double down on some of your mutations. And I think to that end, Wythe, could you, I guess, tell people how they can take on new powers? What does advancement look like and advanced powers in the grid system look like?
Yeah, we use narrative advancement, and there are games now experimenting with other forms of advancement, so having to kind of pay trainers to get better at something a little more realistically, but typically the games use narrative advancement and do have a bit of that power fantasy built in, where every time you level up, because narratively you've accomplished an adventure or a venture in Stillfleet, or a caper in PICARO, or whatever it is, you gain basically one power. So your leveling up is pretty direct. You get good enough at some skill or some mystical ability you've unlocked, kind of anime style, right? You sort of have this realization and you can do the thing that before you kind of were taught how to do, but you couldn't really do it, whatever the backstory is. And that's a big moment because you only have so many powers. They're pretty big. They're narrative, as we were saying. And by unlocking one more every level, it makes leveling up both fast and fun and meaningful. So it's not sort of a matter of bookkeeping around experience points, and you don't have to keep track of a whole bunch of little things going up and down. You're pretty much, you do often, depending on the game, gain pool, so health or grit, but the main one is you gain that extra power. And something that we found out with Stillfleet and we've been applying on, and Tony just gave an example of it, is unlocking new lists. So at first level, you only have so many classes or animals or whatever available, and then as you live, so in Blister Critters you're being more and more mutated, and the cartoon is kind of devolving. The producers are sort of chain smoking, trying to figure out, how do we make this profitable? Again, how cartoony are you playing it? In Stillfleet, you're getting into kind of the weird world of, okay, what does it mean to be doing this as a career? I don't really want to be a space marine for this evil company. And basically, there's just different lists that you can't get at first level that you unlock. And that makes, again, a big, big difference if you're a player, because you get to sit down and look at a new spread or page or however many it is, and look through those options and pick one, and it feels like a big deal. So simple to write, simple to design. You could do fewer or more options, but it allows you to craft those experiences at the table where a player levels up and it really means something, and it's not bookkeeping, and it's tied to their narrative development and their power fantasy, their escapism. So we're looking forward to seeing what other folks kind of do with that idea of narrative advancement.
Here are some tips and tricks for designing your own grid system game.
So I would start with a narrative structure. That is, what are the characters actually going to do all day? Are they going out into space to explore alien hulks and bring back advanced technology for the greedy company? Or are they animals going around trying to get food so their burrow can survive the harsh oncoming winter? Do you have something pretty specific in mind? That will be your kind of list of elements, the things that you'll need to figure out mechanics for, or at least have some kind of answer for players when they say, well, what kind of person am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Tony, what would you add?
I think from there, I would start figuring out broadly classes or different modes of play that the players can segment themselves into. Are you playing the Space Marine that is kind of run and gun, or are you playing the kind of astral researcher? Are you playing the animal who's really good at tinkering with lost human stuff? Figure out what kind of player and what kind of things the player can do, I think, more importantly, and then come up with 3 to 6 of those for your specific game. From there, I believe we would probably want to add powers and mechanics, right, Wythe?
Yeah, I think you'd probably want to go in and say, okay, now let me write out sort of, take a bullet point and turn it into some short, punchy text so that a player can actually use a power to change the narrative. And often those have a grid cost, and you can play around with the numbers. What I would do, if you're interested in our games and you have a copy of any of the free quick starts, or you have the whole cool rulebook for a game, is look at how we've done it, pull some of those numbers. A good range is usually something that's a kind of good power might cost 4 to 6 grid, and something that's really, really powerful might cost like 10 grid, because at first level, you're only going to be able to use that like twice.
Right.
So you got to think about how many times can a character use a power before they're kind of out. And finally,
make it weird. The core grid system just works. So whatever craziness, strangeness you want to throw on top of it, we're here for it, and the system will support it.